What's the most frisky thing you've seen someone do in public? Story 1. I was just telling a coworker this story, and it's definitely frisky. I used to work in a gym with a hot tub and a pool, and I was the opening person. For years, we had an issue of a person crapping in the pool. It used to be more of an occasional thing, and at some point it started happening every morning. It's really annoying because someone's got to go tell all the people who didn't notice the turd that they're swimming in crap, and then scoop it out, close the pool, and then shock it with chlorine. And then it can't be used until a couple hours later when the chlorine levels go back down. The pool crapper would do his thing before like 5:15 a.m. When we've been open 15 minutes, I wasn't sure how that could happen. My boss asked me who I thought it was, but I knew. There was an old man who would be shaking on the door handles at 4:58 a.m., slamming the locked door, and then I would open the door. He would try and run straight in the gym without scanning his key because it would take me too long to get behind the desk and take the key. Then he'd run back to the locker room, and I wouldn't see him again until like 5:45 when he's leaving. And he wouldn't say goodbye to me, which is rude. We got cameras installed in the pool after like the 14th day in a row of this happening, and the camera was white on a white wall, so you could barely see it. That next day, someone came up to the front desk and told me there was crap in the pool. I called my boss at like 5:20 a.m. and was like, "Come in now. We're finding this out now." We watched the camera in horror. This guy would go into the hot tub and just crap himself. We watched him to use one hand to pull the back of his swim trunks out a little and take the other hand and scoop the crap out. He would then toss it into the pool. He would do this a couple times, scoop whatever was just floating in the hot tub out, and then go underwater. The crapping was all done by 5:05 a.m. Then right away he'd get out and shower. And members said that he'd shave in the sauna, get dressed, and leave. Foulest thing I've ever seen. He tried to deny it, and we said we had cameras, and he stopped responding. Never came back again. As disgusting as this is, and totally inexcusable to say the least, at least the guy was making floaters instead of the alternative. You would have to close the pool permanently if this guy had explosive diarrhea. That's like a drain the water and start over kind of situation. Aside from suing this guy for damages and obviously never letting him back in, is there a criminal charge that would even apply here? I guess public indecency or something like that, if you can call that being in public. Story 2. Last year, someone in the community lost their 17-year-old son in a pretty bad accident that took 3 lives. There was a pretty big turnout for her son's funeral considering this was a small town, and he was a senior in high school. 2 of the high school kids decided to hook up in one of the church offices that only had a velvet curtain barrier while close to 300+ people waited in line next to them for the visitation. Not everyone was aware until the girl started moaning like she was being recorded for some kind of punishment in an adult film. Shortly after, an elderly church official pulled back the curtain, scolded them, and the girl went running out crying. The boy sauntered out with a smile on his face. Story 3. Outside Osaka Station, which I think is the second largest station in Japan, so as you can imagine, it was pretty bumpin', there was a group of about 6 or 7 people in semi-casual business attire, probably just finished with an after-work drinking party. One lady was on her knees, pulling a dude's willy through his fly and attempting to suck him off. And the other people in the group were just continuing to talk as if nothing was happening. The only other one that comes to mind was a dude playing a free throw game at a Chuck E. Cheese when I was a kid, and his girlfriend was giving him some fun with her hand. He was wearing pretty loose basketball shorts, and I remember very clearly that every time she did a downstroke, she pulled the waistband down with her, so I got a good eyeful of his veiny friend. I was like 8 or 9, so this was probably the first time I had ever seen anything blatantly like that. Story 4. Saw a couple doing it in a parking lot in broad daylight. I was living in an apartment that overlooked it, but I guess since it was the middle of a weekday, they assumed that no one would be home. They had also parked their truck right next to a nearby wall, and were doing it in between, so really only our apartment could have seen them. Once they noticed we had seen them, they got out in a jiffy. Story 5. One time I saw a woman walking in the park, stop, squat, pull her shorts to the side, and pee on the ground in broad daylight. And then this other time, my wife and I were on the freeway, and this car in front of us kept swerving and slowing down, and then speeding up abruptly. I decided to try and pass them and get away from them. I wasn't sure if they were drunk or what, but I didn't want to be nearby when they inevitably crashed into someone. As I passed them, I looked in and saw the guy driving with his seat leaned almost all the way back, while an old lady went down on him. I got their attention by honking my horn and gave them a thumbs up. They did not look amused. I have sadly also seen far too many men and women just peeing outside in full view of everyone. I know it's probably not fair to say so, But a dude peeing outside doesn't seem to have such a shock value because most guys just kind of turn their backs to the onlookers and the most you might witness is a little bit of the stream. Seems like when a female does it though, it's a little bit more disturbing. There just isn't a good way to pee discreetly, I think. Story 6. When I was working security at an outdoor concert park, I saw a couple, I'd say around their 50s, hanging out in a secluded area. We talked and they said they were on their first date. So I took off back to my office and started watching the camera monitors. A bit later, I saw the woman step away and start peeing on the sidewalk. So I started heading out to where they were at to ask them to leave. I turned the corner and they were both lying on the ground and he was eating her you-know-what. He saw me before she did and held a finger up asking me to give them a minute. Story 7. Years ago, we were walking home from a night out in Bristol, England, and walked past a flat with floor-to-ceiling windows and no curtains, and two couples very hard at it. Technically not in public, but obviously they were doing this for public benefit. Looking back, we wonder if the van parked over the road was somehow filming, but perhaps not. This was also before smartphones, but do you film this kind of thing or not? It would feel weird. Probably you don't. Is the guy in the story seriously asking if it's weird to film another couple getting down in their own apartment? Yes, dude, the answer is yes, that's weird. I'm a little concerned that they had to ask that. Citizens of Bristol, beware of this renegade pervert creeping into your windows. And yes, I know, they were doing it with all their windows open and in plain view of everyone, but that does not give you the right to video, right? It's not like you have to close your eyes and walk away, but have a little bit respect. Story 8. All right, everyone who's been on the Chicago Blue Line will understand. I get on the train, minding my own business, and sit down on one of the ends, back to the window, eyes on my phone. Train starts moving, and a lady, for the purposes of visualizing this, she was an overweight woman in her work outfit, sitting directly across from me. She stands up after a minute. I barely notice this peripherally and think nothing of it. She then walks right up next to me where the train car doors are, so I glance up and smile to acknowledge her presence in my zone. She's got a look of determination in her eyes, and she's fixed her eyes at the train doors leading out into the open-air train car coupling. She pulls the doors apart and steps out, and at that moment I was pretty focused on what I was reading and I didn't process that as being anything out of the ordinary. So I shrugged, looked down, and focused again on my phone. Then I stopped and thought about what I just saw after a delay of a few crucial seconds. What in the world was she doing out in the open air, standing on the train car coupling? My seat faced away from where she exited, and I turned around to look at her out the window, with directly behind me. If you've ever accidentally intruded on an unfamiliar cat, pinching off in some host litter box, you'll know the characteristic gait and the stressed, no eye contact laser beam look, like a war general ordering mortar fire. She was squatting, balanced on the coupling, counteracting all of the bumps, turns, and speed deviations of the 40-mile-per-hour Blue Line train with her quads and calves. She looked like Atlas if his fate was to forever push a never-ending spool of excrement out of his bowels, like the chocolate ice cream dispenser at your local all-you-can-eat buffet. Her butt was approximately 1 foot away from my face. The 40-mile-per-hour wet poop flew in an arc, buffeted by the wind like buckshot at my face. The pellets spattered all over the window in a resonant series of thick, disgusting thuds and sent me instinctively bending backwards over the next row of seating. I looked in awe at the window. It was a Pollock drip painting gone wrong. No color, only brown. No form, only splat. And a slow smear slide. She re-entered the train car and everyone sat down again like nothing had even happened. This story is a complex double-edged sword of a very disgusting and alarming nature. The story is hilarious and extremely well told, but on the other edge of the sword is something so grotesque that the visual images cannot be unseen. This incident has obviously left a lasting impression on this person because they were able to describe it in such horrifying detail. I'm amazed that this woman was able to do this deed with such indifference, which unfortunately just means that she has probably done this act in public before. She is just going around terrorizing the subway and other public places. Alarming. Story 9. On a main highway in town at a set of traffic lights. I was behind a group of young guys in one car. There was a group of young gals in another car right next to them in the next lane. There's honking and flirting going on between the cars. One guy yells out, "Show us your tatas!" And a thicker ginger girl leans out of the window in her tube top, slings out her tatas over the tube of fabric, and bounces them around. As the roar of guys from the car and cars behind us blares and honking continues. I'm just wide-eyed and can't believe what I'm seeing and that this is actually happening as the light turns green and we all go on our merry way. Story 10. When I was about 7 or 8, my family and I went to this big creek we used to go to every year to swim, about an hour's drive from our old house in Pennsylvania. It was my older brother, my parents, and me. We were all having a great time. My mom made hot dogs. I got to wear my new swimsuit. Cool. Then, as my mom and I were about to get back into the water, she pulls me behind her, visibly upset, motions for my dad to come over, says something hushed, and he gets super pissed off. I manage to peek around her, across the creek, and some guy with his shorts pulled down is crazily whacking off at the edge of the creek bank, looking right over at me and my mom. Cue my dad and my brother running across the bridge barefoot to beat the guy up, but end up losing him in the woods. Both of them were seethingly angry for the rest of the day, and my mom didn't want to swim anymore as she was so upset. But I was little and really didn't get what the guy was doing at the time. Story 11. I have one from when I worked at a bowling alley for a while. It was late and there were only 2 lanes being used. One group was playing drinking games while they were bowling, and I assume a bet was made at some point because one of the girls and one of the guys go to one end of the alley and start stripping. By the time my manager and I saw them, she was down to only one piece of clothing and he was down to his boxers. I guess they were going to streak across the alley. She was hot, so between me and my manager, we would have been fine with it, but there were security cameras and we didn't want to get in trouble the next day. The other group on the lanes were 3 guys in their 30s, so they were disappointed that we had to stop her. My manager kept that story to ourselves until we had both had quit just to be safe, and we later found out that the cameras that they would have run in front of weren't working at the time. Now, I've heard of strip poker, but strip bowling is bringing it to a much higher level. I'm a little worried about the hygiene aspect, though, because I'm certain bowling alleys are on the list of top 10 least clean places. That would have been a good time to fake an accident or something to give you an excuse not to stop her. I also think they probably should get those cameras fixed ASAP, because I'm sure some other shady stuff goes down in there that they probably want to record. Story 12. So here I was walking down the street of a town in Australia that I lived at the time. This town is known for the low socioeconomic population who inhabit the area. I saw this older lady waddling along the footpath in front of me. She was clearly a member of the rougher population who had lived a tough life so far. I wasn't interested in talking to her or knowing her business, and she has the exact same thoughts towards me. She moved just off the footpath and into a small service lane between 2 big, respectable, well-looked-after houses. I watched the woman approach the fence and hitch up her skirt, back her bare arse up to a light gray tin fence, and slightly bend over. She wasn't fazed with my presence about 15 meters away from her, and I hear this ungodly sound consistent with a runny bum exploding onto this poor, unfortunate resident's fence. The lady expressed herself for about 30 seconds, stood up, pulled her pants up, and continued to walk down the footpath in front of me. I was absolutely astounded. We both went our separate ways and left the mess for the poor homeowner to wash down this lady's previous meal. Story 13. Gas station men's restroom. Guy in the stall was squatting with his back towards the door, pants around his ankles, and was wiping his bum while simultaneously moaning in what sounded like pain or discomfort, certainly not pleasure. He perhaps had some kind of accident or a regretful rendezvous just prior. It was strange that someone would be in that position in a stall, though, and now that I think about it, maybe he couldn't stand up or even move beyond that stance. Now I have to try and forget that image again. Story 14. I went to a liquor store one time, and in front of me was this old, smelly woman buying 2 bottles of wine. It wasn't exactly a classy liquor store, but I mean, it's super close and I wasn't exactly buying the world's best. Anyway, as I came out of my car, a 2017 Hyundai Sonata, this is important later, she asked for a ride home. She said she had walked there, so I knew she had to live close by. She must have been senile or had Wernicke encephalopathy, wet brain, because she thought that because I had a new car, I was rich. Anyways, she's an old lady. I felt that I should drive her home, even if she hasn't showered in 2 weeks. It just felt like the right thing to do. When we arrived at her apartment, I pulled into the driveway and she mumbled, "Thank you so much." And then, because she didn't have money, flashed me as repayment, I assume. I didn't expect repayment, but now her smelly 70-plus-year-old chest haunts me. I truly feel bad for this old lady because she seemed pretty confused by her whole situation. And it seems the best part of her day is getting her wine to go get day drunk. I bet she shares some of it with her 6 cats that I'm sure also live in their house. I'm not very familiar with the wet brain thing that this person mentioned. Is there someone in the comments who can explain that or has experience with it? Story 15. Was in Amsterdam on King's Day last year. Me and two mates asked some random dude for a boat ride, with intentions to pay him, of course. He accepts, so we hop on the boat and start cruising through the canals and talking about the history of King's Day while watching People Party. After a while, we rode past two chicks casually taking a piss in the river, full spread eagle, no cares given. "Happy King's Day, boys," was all they said. The guy in our boat was super nonchalant about it and was just like, "Well, that's Amsterdam on King's Day." Wholesome note, we tried to pay the dude, but he was like, "It's King's Day, don't worry." He let us drink the beer on his boat, so we bought him some more. Coolest stranger of 2018. Story 16. I went out for lunch and I was on my way back from my favorite deli passing the nearby high school. Running down the side of the road in my direction was a woman. If I had to guess, she was around 40, very well endowed, and wearing nothing but a cowboy hat. She may have had some clothes on, but if she did, they were quite small and flesh-colored. There was a truck parked up just the road from her with no one in it, and I assume it was where she came from. She didn't appear to be in distress, she was just not acknowledging traffic or waving anyone down. She was just jogging down the side of the road in front of the high school, wearing nothing but a cowboy hat. Story 17. I was at something of a hippie fest several years ago, so people's inhibitions were already down. It was July in the Southwest, and it was beyond hot. There was a big creek or small river nearby, and a bunch of us grabbed our drinks and coolers and just moved into the water. While we were just hanging out, a couple, male and female, started making out in the water by the bank. They really got into it, clothes off, and it was actually really interesting. Then the guy got up and started peeing on the girl, who was really into it. The rest of us floating in the water were in shock and now sharing water with the dude's piss floating around. But before we could start objecting, he got down on the bank and the girl squatted over him and started to crap on his chest. About 20 of us floating in the water yelled, "Hell no!" They were shocked and acted all offended that the festival was supposed to be tolerant, etc. But we're all in the same water, and I didn't agree to this. Not my kink. It's extremely bad form to involve non-consenting people in your fetish, even at some very tolerant hippie fest. Remember the previous story about the old guy at the hotel? Apparently, this is how it starts for him. When you're younger, you get into some weird thing, and then you keep doing it in your 70s. Except then, you're doing it alone in a hot tub somewhere. I feel like no matter how free-spirited you are at a music festival, subjecting people to public defecation without their knowledge is crossing the line. Like, way over the line. In the comments, anyone witnessed some crazy music festival shenanigans? Story 18. I was a security supervisor for a few years. I got a call early in the evening one day that my assistant supervisor, who was en route that night, was not responding to radio checks. All of the guards that drove routes had several scan points we had to hit each night, and it registers when you hit the point. He had hit his point at an oil lease we check every night, but he did not hit the next location yet, which he should have been at. The only stop between was one of these stationary guards' locations to check in on them twice a night. I had to drag my ass out of bed and drive a half hour out into the hills in the middle of nowhere to a kitty litter plant where our stationary guard was to see if she had seen the supervisor yet. I found them in his company truck parked up on the hill near the plant, blanket in the bed of the truck, and all apparently recovering together from the adult session they had just had. The plant was 24-hour operational, so there were people walking around in and out of the plant, and anyone could have just driven up that hill to go to the water tower or supply yard, but they apparently didn't care. Both of them were terminated on the spot, and the girl spit on me and told me I was just jealous that she wasn't doing it with me. The guy cried and asked me not to fire him because he didn't want to have to explain to his parents what had happened. The plant manager also had to be informed what was going on because we had to ask both of the guards to leave the property, and I had to stay there by myself until another guard arrived to finish the shift, and he wanted to know what was going on. Like why 3 guards were up there and why 2 of them, including their regular, were leaving in the middle of the night. The whole thing was just awkward and uncomfortable, and we almost lost the contract with the plant over it.